Welcome to the first of three parts of the History of LIS and LIS Professions for SLIS 701, Introduction to Library and Information Studies. This lecture will feature highlights in the evolution of libraries and the development of librarianship in the United States. You will find the required materials for this lecture in the Readings and Websites section of the module lesson plan on Blackboard. Please keep in mind that there are three segments to this lesson. By the end of this discussion, you will be able to identify the characteristics of a library, recognize how libraries were established and the conditions under which libraries flourish, describe the types of systems used in the ancient world to transmit and record information, and compare and contrast the types of documents Egyptians and Mesopotamians used to record knowledge. Our exploration of the history of libraries begins by defining what a library is, the purpose libraries serve, and the conditions in which libraries flourish. In the seminal text, History of Libraries of the Western World, Michael Harris notes that it is important to understand what a library is before explaining the history of libraries, stating that a library is a collection of graphic materials arranged for relatively easy use, cared for by an individual or individuals familiar with the arrangement, and accessible to at least a limited number of persons. Harris also points out that the distinctions made between libraries and archives are relatively modern, and for historical purposes, these entities can be considered together. Jesse Shearer believed that societies needed libraries in order to make the records of human adventure available over long periods of time, and argued that libraries should be regarded as an important element in the communication processes of individuals and societies. Libraries serve more than a custodial function. They hold the capacity to be hubs within the social matrix, reflecting the evidence of the political and ethical nature of a society, as well as serving as a gateway to interconnect the culture of a society. Our text names three factors required for the growth of a library: centralization, economic growth, and political stability, noting that throughout history, libraries have grown and flourished in politically stable, highly populated areas with ample resources of wealth and leisure. To appreciate the evolution of libraries, it is important to understand how advances in human civilization relate to stages of information systems development, from the representation and communication of language and numbers, documentation of events, creation and organization of records, to the establishment of libraries, and inevitably to librarianship in the United States. The recorded history of libraries is over 5,000 years old, and beyond the scope of this presentation, this lecture does not attempt to cover the histories of language, writing, and books, nor is it a comprehensive review of the milestones of the 5,000-year history of libraries, but rather provides a supplement to the people, places, and events reviewed in Chapter 2 of the text. Archaeological findings offer evidence supporting the notion that early humans transmitted information through drawing and symbols to represent thought as well as record events. The archaeological record indicates that from the 4th through 1st millennia BCE, systems for recording and transmitting information developed in 6 regions of the world: Fertile Crescent settlements of Western Asia, Nile Delta and Nile Valley, Southern and Eastern Asia, and the Andean civilizations of the Americas. In the Fertile Crescent, cuneiform writing was developed by Sumerians of Mesopotamia in present-day Iraq, and hieroglyphic writings by Egyptians in the Nile Delta and Nile Valley. In southern and eastern Asia, the Harappan script was developed in the Indus Valley of present-day Pakistan and India, and the Shang script in China, while in pre-Hispanic Peru, the Quipu textile system was used by the Norte Chico civilization circa 3000 to 1800 BCE. We can summarize that each of these early systems required knowledge of organization, storage, and retrieval methods in order to be utilized. Current archaeological evidence suggests that the earliest known repositories of recorded knowledge were housed in the temples, royal palaces, and tombs of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Excavated Sumerian clay tablets and Egyptian papyri have been translated and found to contain information about agricultural and religious activities, administrative transactions, and military excursions. These collections of documents covered subjects in astronomy, history, liturgics, mathematics, and medicine. Using our earlier definition, libraries of antiquity span through the time period of 3000 BCE to 300 CE. Currently, Egypt and Mesopotamia hold the distinction of having the oldest documents of recorded knowledge, but scholarly debate is ongoing around the firsts in library history. Harris states that it is difficult to say whether the first library in the Western world was located in Egypt or Mesopotamia. I've come to the conclusion that it is a point of conjecture. You each will have to come to your own conclusion or agree to disagree. The archaeological record indicates that Fertile Crescent civilizations have coexisted, intermingled, and battled since prehistoric time. The unifying factor regarding library corpora of antiquity is that it developed from the temple, government, administrative, and personal archives of their respective societies. For the purpose of this lecture, I will begin with Mesopotamian libraries because larger quantities of text have survived over time. Mesopotamia was a territory composed of portions of present-day Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. It is a Greek word meaning land between the rivers, in reference to the Tigris-Euphrates river system coursing through the area. Sumerians lived in the region circa 3500 to 2500 BCE, followed by Babylonians circa 2000 to 1800 BCE, and Assyrians circa 1500 to 600 BCE. The archaic dictionary of Egyptian and Assyrian monuments in papyri listed Amel Anu as a template writer and official scribe of Babylonia. He is believed to have been the keeper of the tablets circa 2000 BCE in the palace library of Ur. Mesopotamian libraries were temple or palace libraries. Three of the most renowned in the region were the Great House of Tablets in Ur, Dir Sharukin, the palace library at Khorsabad, and the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal. Excavated artifacts reveal that Sumerians used clay tablets as a medium to record knowledge. Later, the Babylonians stored the clay tablets on wooden shelves in baskets or jars, filed by subject. These texts were cataloged in one of two ways: incipit, using the beginning or opening words of a tablet, or colophon, using the title of the text and the number of the tablet in a series. Dictionaries and grammar tablets used for training scribes have also been discovered in excavations. Dir Sharukin, the palace library of Khorsabad, was open to the public and contained hundreds of clay tablets. One text in particular was a king list dating from 2000 BCE to Sargon II, circa 750 BCE. Sargon's great-grandson, Ashurbanipal, moved the Assyrian capital to Nineveh in present-day Mosul, Iraq, constructing what is believed to have been the first library in the contemporary sense of the term. Ashurbanipal sent agents out to all parts of the then-known world, directing them to collect the written records of the world. He also had palace scribes trained to read early Sumerian and Babylonian texts in order to translate ancient records into Assyrian. As a result, the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal contained 30,000 multilingual tablets. The library was arranged by subject, with clay tablets contained within jars labeled by shelf and room location. Shelf lists were placed on the walls of each room, identifying the title, number of tablets contained in a work, the number of lines, opening words, and a symbol indicating the location of the work. The library was open to official and unofficial scholars. Unfortunately, the library was destroyed by fire in the Battle of Nineveh in 1612 BCE. Clay tablets from the library were rediscovered beneath ruins by archaeologists in the 19th and 20th century CE. Since 2014, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, aka ISIL or ISIS, have targeted historic places of worship and UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Iraq, Syria, and Libya. In January, ISIS bombed the ancient wall of Nineveh, burned the Mosul Library in February, and iconoclast smashed artifacts in Deir Sharukin in March. The recorded history of Egypt goes back to the 4th millennium BCE, approximately the same time that clay tablet records appeared in Sumer. Stelae and sheets of papyrus were used as media to record knowledge. The Palermo stone is the oldest historical document known to have survived from ancient Egypt. It is one of 7 surviving fragments of a stele known as the Royal Annals of the Old Kingdom of Ancient Egypt. The main fragment has been in Palermo, Sicily since 1866. It is a king list documenting Egyptian dynastic history from 3218 to 2345 BCE. Libraries in ancient Egypt were also temple or palace libraries. Scholars relying on tomb illustrations and monument inscriptions have learned that Egyptians referred to libraries as the house of life, house of books, and house of writings. The house of life was a temple complex containing a scriptorium for creating, preserving, and archiving written and pictorial text. The earliest reference to a house of life comes from a royal decree of Pepi II, the 6th dynasty king of the late Old Kingdom, circa 2200 BCE. This document announced a tax exemption for the Temple of Min. The House of Books was a part of the temple complex and contained the collections of the House of Life. Compared to the quantity of Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, Egyptian papyri collections have not fared as well over the ages. The oldest surviving papyrus archive is the Abusir papyri, circa 2400 BCE. It is an administrative archive containing the inventory of the temples of Abusir. Tel el Armana, the palace archive of Akhenaten, contained a house of rolls comprised of Egyptian text as well as a collection of diplomatic correspondences. The Armana letters contain 382 clay tablets written to Akhenaten, inscribed in Akkadian. These letters came from vassal rulers in Syria-Palestine and kings of Assyria and Cyprus. Excavations from the Temple of Thebes unearthed the tombs of father and son librarians Neb-Nufri, the superior over the books, and Nufri-Hetep, chief over the books. The library was thought to have contained 20,000 papyri scrolls. To date, the only surviving library structure of ancient Egypt is the inner hypostyle hall of the Temple of Edfu. The manuscripts of the House of Papyrus did not survive, but the walls are inscribed with the catalog of the library's holdings. In the closing millennium of the ancient world, other notable achievements included the production of amacha, a paper material made from fig trees in the pre-Hispanic Aztec Empire circa 500 BCE, the Alexandrian Museum and Library, estimated to have contained over 400,000 manuscripts cataloged in the library's Pina case, and considered the research hub of the Hellenistic world. The Imperial Library of Constantinople, considered to have been instrumental in the preservation of ancient Greek literature. An estimated 100,000 texts are thought to have been transcribed from papyrus to parchment, thin layers of stretched animal skin. All of these great milestones were destroyed by the fires of conquest. As I stated previously, the recorded history of libraries spans over 5 millennia and beyond the scope of this presentation. With that in mind, please read your text for information regarding ancient Greece circa 500 to 283 BCE and ancient Rome circa 168 BCE to 410 CE regarding the establishment of Greek libraries for the purposes of scholarship and research and the public libraries of Rome. I will not reiterate these points. I also will not detail the libraries of ancient India, China, or the system for recording knowledge utilized by the Inca of the Norte Chico civilization. There are signed materials covering this information. The next segment of this module continues with the development of libraries during the medieval and modern period. Of systems used in the ancient world to transmit and record information and compare and contrast the types of documents Egyptians and Mesopotamians used to record knowledge. Our exploration of the history of libraries begins by defining what a library is, the purpose libraries serve, and the conditions in which libraries flourish. Of the module lesson plan on Blackboard. Please keep in mind that there are 3 segments to this lesson. By the end of this discussion, you will be able to identify the characteristics of a library, recognize how libraries were established and the conditions under which libraries flourish, describe the types. In the seminal text, History of Libraries of the Western World, Michael Harris notes that it is important to understand what a library is before explaining the history of libraries, stating that a library is a collection of graphic materials arranged for relatively easy use, cared for by an individual or individuals familiar with the arrangement, and accessible to at least a limited number of persons. Harris also points out that the distinctions made between libraries and archives are relatively modern, and for historical purposes, these entities can be considered together. Jesse Shearer believed that societies needed libraries in order to make the records of human adventure available over long periods. Welcome to the first of 3 parts of the History of LIS and LIS Professions for SLIS 701, Introduction to Library and Information Studies. This lecture will feature highlights in the evolution of libraries and the development of librarianship in the United States. You will find the required materials for this lecture in the Readings and Websites section